this video, I want to talk to you about model-driven apps and how they can be used to build apps inside your organization. Something to know about model-driven apps is they are intended to be data first or data-driven. So think of a scenario, or if you have a scenario where you're building an app or a business process, and let's say you've got 10 tables, 10 different data entities that you're dealing with, I would push you toward model-driven app as opposed to something like a Canvas app. And the reason for that is model-driven apps comes with a whole host of things out of the box, like views, forms, export to Excel, reporting, charts, you name it. There's a whole host of things that come out of the box in addition to just the data structure that you might build, and it's automatically built for you. It kind of just builds itself. So in this video, we're gonna take that data first approach to show you how to build your first model-driven app. It might feel a little bit backwards at first because we're not just building the app and going from there. We're gonna start with the data and then see how all of the layers build on top of that automatically. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started building our first model-driven app. And the thing that I wanna touch on first before we get into building is we're gonna start with a solution. So one of the key things, best practices in terms of what Microsoft would recommend in using the Power Platform would be to use solutions as kind of a place where you're gonna build all of your things. And so we're gonna start there. One of the things that you might be tempted to do is you might be tempted, like I was the first time, to build an app right in here by saying new model-driven app. And we're not going to do that. We're going to start with a solution. So let's jump over to solutions first. And if solutions is something that you would like to know more about, post a comment below and we'll add that to our backlog of content. So in this case, I've got an intro to model-driven apps solution already created for me. And we're going to jump right into that solution. And the beauty of a solution in terms of building model-driven apps is that it sets up the proper context for you. So if you were to just jump right in and start building your model-driven app, you're going to jump into an app designer world where you're going to be a little bit confused about what you actually need to build, where things live, and how they fit together. So in this case, inside of a solution, we have a series of buckets over here on the left that kind of are things or components that'll be in our solution. One of the key things here is our list of tables. And notice at the top, you have the ability to add a variety of different other types of components as well to your solution. But these are kind of the basic building blocks that we'll start with. So in this particular case, we're going to start with a table. So here we are inside of our tables. We have no tables so far. One thing to note is that there's a lot of stuff built into Dataverse for you. So within the environment that you find yourself in, there's probably a lot of other Dataverse tables, a lot of out-of-the-box stuff. So you have the ability to add some existing stuff. In this case, we're going to add a new table. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to find my table, choose that. We're going to give it a name. We're going to use support requests as our topic. If I could type. All right, so notice that it puts a plural name on it for you as well. You can add a description if you want to. One thing to note about tables is that every table that you create is going to want to define what's called a primary column. This is either going to be a name or a subject out of the box. It will be the name of the field. You can call it something else if you want. The purpose of this field is it's kind of a human distinguishable unique identifier. So it becomes a handle or a link within the application that your users can click on and uniquely kind of identify a record. They can then click on it and go to that record. So that's what the primary column is for. And then there's a number of other advanced options that we will get into at a later date. But basically things like record ownership. You can specify an icon for the table if you want to. One of the key things here is this type of table. So you have standard, activity, and virtual. Again, something for a later topic. But there's a lot of advanced settings that you can leverage to do some pretty cool things inside of your model-driven app and inside of Dataverse. But for now, we're going to start with that. We're going to go ahead and click Save, and our table will be created. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some columns to our table to support our support request. So in this case, I'm going to expand the support request table. I'm going to jump to columns here. Note, you could also access it here as well. But I'm going to jump to it. And the first thing to notice is that there's a ton of out-of-the-box or default columns that are automatically added. Now, these are going to be available for any Dataverse table that you create. They're going to be things like who created the record, when was it created, who modified it, those types of things, who owns the record, if a team owns it, if a business user owns it, if a user owns it. All of those things are kind of out of the box built in for you. And so those can be very useful. A key one to pay attention to is this status field. This is going to be an active or inactive value. And this is actually used, once you get into this, it's used to do what I would call soft delete records. So it gives users the ability to basically remove a record from the purview of the application without actually deleting it. And I'll show you a little bit about how that's used when we get to views. Okay, so the first column I'm going to add is going to be a lookup column. And this is basically going to be the person that submits the request. I'm going to call it submitter. In this particular case, it's going to be a lookup. And once we do that, we can choose whether or not this is required. In this case, I want it to be required because I want somebody to put in some information. And then, like anything else in Dataverse, there's a lot of stuff built in for us. So this is going to be like the contact or the person that submits this. In this particular case, I'm going to look for the contact table. And there we have it. And note some advanced options. You can specify something more specific in the schema name or in the relationship name if you want to. Usually I just leave those default, and we're going to go ahead and click save. All right, so now that column has been added to my table. Notice one thing that this actually did for us automatically. If you look over at your tables, you'll see that the contact table has now been added to our solution. So it basically took a table that was outside of the solution, existed in Dataverse, and brought it in so that we could work with it within our solution and ultimately within our app. The next field I'm going to add to our support request is going to be a support request type or a category field. So we'll call it category. In this case, I'm going to do a choice field. And so we're going to choose a choice. Again, we're going to make this one required. I want users to fill it in. And so you have an option here to sync with a global choice. I kind of recommend this. So if this category was going to be something that you were potentially going to use in other tables in your solution, you would want it to be a global choice. So we're going to say yes. And so then in this case, we need to create a new choice. And we're going to call that support request category. And then we're going to put some things in here like network, software, hardware, and let's do something for other. We'll save that. And then we're going to plug support request category in there. And then if we want a default choice, we can select one. In this case, I won't. And we'll go ahead and click save. All right, now I've got a number of fields or columns added to my custom support request table. The next thing we need to do is we need to have a way for the users to actually view this content. And to do that, we're going to create a view. So you'll notice that under our support request table, we also have a category for views. I'm going to go ahead and select that. First thing to note here is there's a bunch of stuff built for you automatically out of the box. And each of these things has a purpose. The primary one that you're going to care about right off the bat is going to be basically this active support request. So anytime you create a table in Dataverse, you're going to get an active view, an inactive view, a quick find, et cetera, et cetera. The main one that we're focused on right now is this active support requests view. We're going to simply go and edit this view. So you could create a new view if you wanted to, but this is going to be the default view out of the box that's already used. So I'm going to go ahead and modify this. And so now that I've got this view open, I have an option on the left-hand side to add from any of the fields that I feel like I need to. So in this particular case, I'm interested in category, and I might be interested in description and escalate it to product team. And then I might also be interested in the submitter, okay? And so you'll notice that they get added to the view, and I've got this created on here. I really don't care about that one. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that one. And so just as simple as that, I've got a view created. Some things to pay attention to here is that you do have the ability to go get data from related tables. So as opposed to just the content or the columns that are on the support request table, if I click related, I can go get other information from other tables that I'm related to. That can be super handy in a view. And then in addition to that, you've got some options over here on the right-hand side for sorting. So you can sort by multiple columns, ascending or descending, and then options for filters. So if you remember that soft delete thing that I talked about earlier, by default, all of the views that you get out of the box that are automatically created for you are going to have this status is active filter set. And so that's basically the way that Dataverse or your model-driven app allows users to soft delete something by deactivating the record without actually deleting it and completely removing it from the system. It's because all of these views kind of start with this filter. You can, of course, remove that filter if you want to, or change it to something else, or add other filters as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and click save. And then in order for this to be available to your application and ultimately for your users, you've got to remember to publish it as well. We'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we have a way for our users to view the data. We're going to jump back and we're going to go figure out a way for our users to actually create data. So again, under our tables, I'm going to go to our support request, and there's another area here for forms. We're going to start there. Again, out of the box, I've got a few forms. The key one to pay attention to is the main form. So we're going to get these 3 out of the box by default. We're going to go in here and we're going to edit our main form. And the thing that we care about is we care about the fields that we added. So the default view of this form, or the way that it gets created off the bat, is basically going to have one field. And it'll be that name field, or that primary column. And it'll have an owner. And so now we need to add our other fields to this. And so there's a lot of different things that you can do. On the left, we can add a variety of different controls or layouts or sections and various things like that. We also have the option here to select from fields. Note, these are just fields that are available to this entity or to this table. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drop some of those on here now simply by selecting them. And it's simply going to plop them on there. If we want to change where they are, we can drag them in whatever order we need to. And so then it'll simply add the subsequent fields right after that. So we're going to add the submitter, escalated to product team, and we're going to add a description as well. And in this case, the description is a multi-line field, so I'm going to change that field height a little bit so it gives the user a little bit more real estate to input data. And again, just like in the views, we're going to save and publish. All right, so before I jump out of here, I also want to bring your attention to some things here on the right. Any one of these controls has a variety of properties. The form itself has properties, so you can choose to hide things or lock things or make them read-only for the user if there's a field that you just want them to see, for example. You also have the ability to specify events, so if you have some really custom JavaScript or custom logic that you want to implement, you can do it with JavaScript by adding an event here, or you can use business rules, which are super handy, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But this is basically a really easy way for you to be able to do something like show or hide a field based on a specific value in another field, for example. Okay, well, why don't we just go ahead and jump right into building a business rule. So one thing to note is you could create that business rule directly from this form if you wanted to, but I want to go back and I want to kind of take that structured approach, fully recognizing that we have kind of all of the context of our solution here. And you'll note that under each table, you also have a section for business rules. And so this is where I'm going to start building a business rule. So I'm going to go ahead and click New Business Rule. So business rules, frowny face, still use the classic editor. It's unfortunate. It's workable, but it could be better and hopefully will be better one day. But in any event, this is the editor that you get for a business rule. One thing to note is the name of the business rule is kind of hidden up here, and so often people will forget to name them, and you end up with new business rule 1, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, we're going to give it a name first. I'm going to call it show hide escalated field. Okay. And so then the next thing, if you want to put a description in, you can. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to specify my condition though. And so in this particular case, we're going to say my condition is going to be, I'm simply describing the condition. If category is not network, for example. And so in this case, now that it's time, I'm going to pick the particular field that I want. So in this case, I want my category field. Notice that you can pick any of the other fields here as well. And basically, I want to know if it's not network, or if it is network, we're going to basically hide the escalated field. So I'm actually going to pick network, and I'm going to reverse my logic here so that it actually makes some sense. So if the category is network, key thing to remember here is every time you do something over here in this panel on the right, you need to remember to click apply. Often people will forget to click apply, and then they'll click off and it won't have saved their changes. So now that we've done that, you'll see in this little business rule text view, it says, hey, if the category equals network. The next thing we want to do is we want to actually add some actions to this, and we're going to do something really simple in this, and we're simply going to set visibility. So in the yes case, or the true case, I'm going to drag that component over here, and I'm going to give this a name. We're going to set the escalated field to visible, and then we're going to go find that field. So that escalated to product team field was the one that I wanted, and the visibility is yes. Again, remember to click apply. So now that gets added to our business rule. And then I need something to do in the no case. Or in the false case. And we're basically doing the same thing. We're going to say set to hidden. And again, we're going to choose that same escalated field. And this time, choose no. Remember to click apply. And so now we have all of those rules specified down here in that text viewer, if you will. But they're laid out for us nicely in that canvas as well. Last thing to do here is we need to save it and activate it. So it's kind of a two-step process. So similar to save and publish. In this case, it's actually save and turn it on. So once we've saved it, you'll have the ability to activate it. And that will take you a few seconds and it will give you another dialog. You click activate and you're good to go. So one last thing before we leave the business rules. You also have the ability to scope the business rule. So in this case, I've scoped it at the entity level, which means any form where I'm using the category field and the escalated field, for example, this business rule is going to get applied. You could scope it, for example, for a specific form or 2 or 3 specific forms if you wanted to. So that's an extra little feature that you might take advantage of as you're building business rules. Okay, so here we are back in our business rules area of our table, and we can see that show hide escalated field is there and it's turned on. You do have the ability from this view to actually turn this off. So that's basically the activation, deactivation for that business rule if you need to. All right, finally, after we've got a table, a view, a form, and a business rule, we're actually ready to do what we set out to do, and that's actually build an app. So in this particular case, I'm going to jump right to our apps, and we're going to add an app to our solution. It's going to be a model-driven app. And we're simply going to call this our support request app. And we're going to go ahead and create it. So now we're in basically what I would call the app designer. And this is basically where you're going to actually put those pieces together that we had. On the left-hand side, you've got some options for pages. So that's something that we're going to create here in a second. But you also have some areas where you can define navigation and what that should be. You have a section that will tell you what tables or entities or data is in your application and in your environment. And then business process flows, which a more advanced topic for a later date. And then on the right-hand side, you've kind of got some basic top-level information if you wanted to set an icon or rename your application or provide a description or something like that for your app. You can do that over here. We're going to go ahead and start by adding a page. And so you can do that front and center right here in the middle or from this pages over here on the left-hand side. You're going to get 3 options when you're creating a page. One is going to be a Dataverse table, another is going to be a dashboard, and another is going to be custom page. In this case, we're doing data first, right? So what really matters is the table that we created, and this is kind of the beauty of model-driven apps is once you have your tables built and you've got your data structure in place and they're all related to each other, you can literally kind of build your app just by choosing Dataverse table pages, and that's what we're going to do for this one. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to select the tables that I care about. So these tables that we're looking for are existing tables. So you have an option here to create new ones if you need to. I'm going to go ahead and look for my support request. So there's that. I've checked that one, and I'm going to look for the contact too because I think that might be useful. And then you have an option here to show these in navigation. So this will basically automatically add a page to the navigation for those things. We're going to go ahead and leave that on and click add. All right, so our app is starting to take shape. You see we have support requests and contacts. If I want these things to be ordered differently in navigation, we can jump over to the navigation and do that. So number one, I'm going to get rid of the sub area. So that's kind of added by default. I don't care about that. And I'm going to move this up. And so now that kind of changed the order in my navigation. And you can add other things to navigation as well, but this is kind of a good place to start. All right, so as you can see, our app is starting to take shape. If I select one of these things in the left-hand navigation of the app, it'll take me to the view, the corresponding default view, so active support requests or my active contacts, for example, for each of those tables. In this particular case, it's time to actually create some data. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to go ahead and publish this, and then we're going to play the app, and we're going to create our first support request. All right, so we're going to go ahead and play the app. One thing to note about the navigation, I was kind of changing the order of those things. One thing to note in particular is that whichever one of these is the highest one in that list will be the default homepage. So if you click on the homepage here, for example, it takes me to active support requests. So that's just a little thing to know. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new support request, and there's that form that we created with the fields that we added to it. So support request 1, we're going to choose a category. Let's do software for this one. Jim Johnson was the guy that did it. So he has a problem with his Facebook app. And I've left myself as the owner, and so now I can simply save and close. And just like that, I have data in my view. So let's go ahead and add another one because I want to try out that business rule that we did. Support request 22, and this time we're going to choose network. And so now that escalated to product team shows up, and I can say, yep, this is going to be escalated. Actually, let's go ahead and create a new contact and see what that looks like. So here we go. This is something that's actually built into the system. We'll add Mitch in there. And so just like that, we've got a new contact record. I didn't have to build that. It was there automatically. So that's kind of the next thing that I want to talk about before we get out of here, and that is, well, let's finish this up first. Required field. There we go. So that's one of the things I was mentioning is there's a lot of stuff that's out of the box built into Dataverse and to model-driven apps. And so one of the things as you start building model-driven apps, you're going to be tempted to be like, oh, how do I figure that out? I need to find a way to build that. Or somebody's going to ask you, a user is going to come along and say, hey, I really need to export data from this app. How do I do that, right? Can you build a flow for me? Can you export the data for me? So what I would encourage you to do is just kind of slow down, take a step back, and pay attention to what's out of the box. So some of the stuff that you can expect to see in any of your model-driven apps are going to be things like export to Excel options, import from Excel. So this stuff is just literally automatically built in. You can even edit the data in Excel if you want to, connect directly to the Dataverse table. Email a link to a record to someone. So you can select a record, for example, assign it to someone. There's all kinds of things that are just built into Dataverse and built into the model-driven app that I would encourage you to pay attention to before you go off and build a bunch of custom stuff. And that's the point of model-driven apps after all. All right, so as you can see, maybe that took all of, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes as I was guiding through it to actually build an app and have data up and running. Publish that, share it with your users, and you're ready to go. You can add more tables to it, more relationships, charts, all kinds of other things. Dashboards, for example, can be added to your app as well. All right, everybody, that wraps it up for our intro to model-driven apps. Hopefully this was helpful for you today. If you liked this content, please like or subscribe. If you have any questions or comments on this, feel free to post a comment below, and we look forward to seeing you next time.